All right, this is the 28th Sugya Shir on Vayol Moshe, and Be'ez Hashem we're going to learn pokeach ivrim, and we're holding by his chapter 6, Dugma Vav. We're skipping chapter 5 because it's really not negated to the subject of Zionism, it's just about Derech HaBashem, so we're going to skip over that. Okay, so Ruboy Mitoich Kuloi. The subject of Achrei Rabbim Lahatois, of following the Roiv of Poiskin. So Mezayfei Avayol Moshe Loi Histapku Rak Ba'ashmotzes Gedoy Yisrael, that he says he's trying to be Malam Zchus on the rebbe, so he says the rebbe didn't really write Vayol Moshe, it's someone else. Whoever wrote it was not only speaking bad about Gedoy Yisrael, Ela Hirchiku Leches Livgoya Gam B'Torah Atzma. They were also attacking the Torah itself. Ulesares din Torah de Achrei Rabbim Lahatois, and they turned upside down the Torah's din of following the majority. B'divrei shtus behevel muflagim. What? Lahatois, to lean. In other words, to lean the din, to go after the majority. B'divrei shtus behevel muflagim. And what they say is a shtus. Machmas hasina l'gdol Yisrael, and the reason why they say it is because they hated the other Gedol Yisrael who argued on the Satmar rebbe. Just like people who went off the derech, they hate Gedol Yisrael, they did the same thing. They did the whole thing at the expense of the rebbe. Okay, Uvayom Moshe Mezuyif Ois Kufayin Gimel Kavu ki ein lis chashe bedas go'oni v'tzdike ador shechivu lishtate b'bechiris. So the Rebbe is speaking about why not to listen to the Gedolim who said to vote in the Zionist elections. So one of his reasons, one of his arguments is Ki din ha-Torah de Achrei Rabbim Lahatois eino noeg ela beruboy mitoich kuloi. That the only time the din of Achrei Rabbim Lahatois is, he says, yeah, let's say there's a majority of poskim who say not like me, but you can't follow them because the whole din of Achrei Rabbim Lahatois is only when you sit together. He says, "Hainu rak kasher kol chachmei Yisrael miskabtzim ladun yachad." They all get together and they discuss it, and then come to a psak. So then you can follow that psak. If the majority of that group comes to a psak, even if the minority disagrees, you follow that majority. That's Achrei Rabbim Lahatois. Like the miut is batal b'roiv, and you follow the roiv. But mashenkin, when it's all over the world, you have a gadol here, a gadol there, and nobody actually sat down to discuss the shaila, then you don't follow the roiv. That's the Rebbe's argument. Where's his proof? Mishalas Tshuvas Haral Bach, from the responsum of Reb Levi ben Chaviv, Bekuntris Hasmicha Shebesoiflei. The Maral Bach has in the back of his Shalas Tshuvas, he has a Kuntris Hasmicha, which is about the Shaila that took place in Eretz Yisrael in the 1500s, when the Beis Yosef's Rebbe, the Maribei Rav, decided to reinstitute Smicha, and they lived in Sfas, the Maribei Rav and his Talmidim. So they were the majority of the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, and they decided to reinstitute Smicha, because the Rambam says that it's possible to reinstitute Smicha if you have Roiv of the Tzadikim, of the Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael. So, Zok the Maral Bach, he says, you can't paskin based on the Rabbanim of Tzfas alone, even though they are the majority. Mishum shelichidish hasmicha kasav Rambam shetzorach kibbutz kol chachmei Eretz Yisrael b'davka. The Rambam requires all, and he says even if you're going to tell me that roiv is like all, but in this case he says ukadei she'iyah Achrei Rabbim Lahatois tzorach she'iyah ruboy mitoich kuloi. You have to have a roiv from a group that all met together. So Dr. Maral Bach, since you didn't meet with me when you made this decision to restart the smicha, you can't overpower me with the koyach of roiv, because I'm not part of your group. I didn't sit down with you. You didn't hear my reasons. Maybe if you would have heard my reasons, you would have agreed with me. But now you sat down all your own and decided to restart smicha, so you can't use the roiv for that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Just like whenever a bezdin meets together, it has to meet all together. You have 23 people who sit down to paskin a din in a fasha's case. They all have to be there. You can't just have 13 people decide. V'afim yirtzu achshav ladunim kulam, and Zok the Maralbach, maybe you want to come now and discuss it with me? No, too late. Lo yoyel harasam. Why? Mishum shekvar asu ma'aseh v'kisuf l'mihadar, because you already acted on your psak, and now you're going to be embarrassed to go back, so you have a bias against agreeing with me. Ayin Sham, and the Rebbe says, V'kol shekein bizmanenu, kol shekein today, that if all the people who paskin to vote, they didn't include the Rebbe in their discussion, and therefore, even if they come out that you should vote, they can't be a roiv. Even if they're roiv, they can't overpower him with roiv because he wasn't there. And if they're going to go back and discuss it now, let's say Vayol Moshe is printed, and all of the Gedolim get copies of Vayol Moshe, and they all read it, and they go through it, and they all slug it up, and they say, yeah, we're still going to paskin that you should vote. So the Rebbe, no, that doesn't help because it's you're already biased, you're already paskined. Yeah, Adkan Torah Divrei Vayol Moshe Mezuyev. Okay, so let's see what his kasha on this is. Okay? Hinei kan nishtabshu ha-mezayfim v'hoichichu buris gag al gag. That the people who wrote this sefer prove that they're very unlearned. Why? Koydem kol af tinoi kishel beis rabban yoidim shebechol dinei ha-Torah gam b'chiyuvei kares. Poiskim adin tamid al pi roiv ha-poiskim. That we always follow, in all dinei Torah, we always follow the roiv of the poiskim. Even if it's like Rishonim or Achronim, lived in different places, different times, you could still count them up and go after the roiv. Even though they never got together. Okay, and on the bottom he says, Ki hada halacha karabim, havi halacha l'moish misinai. It's not just the pasuk go achar rabim lahatois, it's also halacha l'moish misinai. Ba'in heitiv b'rashi chulin. Okay, and so he says that you can follow the roiv even if they're in different places. And he says in parentheses, Ki ein ruboy mitoich kuloi el bebezdin davka. The din of ruboy mitoich kuloi, that you have to have all of the bezdin there at the time that you go with the roiv, is only by a bezdin that's actually ruling on a case. Like if someone's chayav misa or something like that, then you have to have the whole 23 there, and then you can have roiv of them. But if the whole 23 aren't there, it doesn't work. But that's only by an actual case. But if you have a shayla in halacha, like any shayla in shulchan aruch, machlokes, you count up the shittas, you go b'aseroiv, even if they're in different places at different times. Okay. Yeah. So let's stop here for a second, and we're gonna go and look at Vayol Moshe inside and see what he's really saying. So, Kufay and Gimel, not my Mishal Shua, is Kufay and Gimel. And it's page Kuf Samachay. There, you got it. Okay. He says, V'amar al-bach b'kuntras asmicha shebesoif ha-sefer hevi kol ho'inyan shechach mitzvahs hechlitu lahachzir asmicha. That the Rabbanim of Tzvas decided to restart smicha. V'amar al-bach im chachmei Yishalayim lo yiskimu l'davar. They didn't agree. Because of Shalom Amar al-bach, af ki anachnu muatim neged chachmei Tzvas, even though we are the minority, the nefishi minan tuva, there are many more than us. B'kumakam ef shalom rabazeh achar rabim lahatois. You can't go after the roiv. We didn't gather together to discuss the question together. We don't say that you follow the roiv. Only when it's roiv of a group that met together. Even if they're going to get together now, it's not going to help. They already acted on it, so they're not going to go back. Because of the bias that they have in favor of their own shita, what's it called? The confirmation bias, right? You already did something, you want to continue doing it. So therefore, it's going to create a das, a bias in your head, to make a mistake about the truth. From the minyan haroiv. You can't combine the chachmei tzfas to be a roiv. Beherich bedavar lahavi kam rayas min hashas da'af be'amroim akdoshim. Achar she'asu ma'aseh al pi rasam. Once a moyer paskin based on something, chashvu lahem l'noigim mitam zeh. They were considered negeh bedavar to ksifa milsel mihadar. So it's even the amroim akdoshim. So kal v'chomer bechachmei zmanenu. Kal v'chomer today's gedolim that they are not going to want to change their mind. Yuyon sham sheherich. And he says, "V'kacha ani roya achshav sheyadei ani sheyesh gam b'seicho aguda rabbanim balabatim yirei Hashem shekoyev lohem amaisim hoela." That there are some people in the aguda itself, either rabbanim, gedolim, right, who are part of the aguda, or balabatim, people from the activists of the aguda. I think he has in mind Harry Goodman, famous aguda activist, or Moshe Schoenfeld, people like that. That they were bothered by what the aguda was doing. They couldn't go against the official leadership. I tell them to leave the aguda. So he says, "Kivin shehem kvar b'soichai v'astu ma'asim rabim b'miflagazu ksifa lahu milsel mihader." They don't want to go out of the aguda because they're already in it. They already done many things in it, so they're not going to leave it now. So I guess maybe he's not talking about Goodman or other people. Maybe he's talking about people who are gedolim, who betzim would agree with him, but since they already are in it, they're not going to back out of it. Since the aguda is not mechavan to the truth. So we have a problem here. So the Rebbe is proving clearly from the Marabach that you have such a concept that you don't listen to the Roiv when you're not together, and yet the pokeach ivrim seems to have a point too, because he's saying that you do listen to the Roiv. We always follow Roiv Poskim. You see what the Shulchan Aruch has, the Shulchan Aruch decide the Paskin. He brings down different Poskim in the Beis Yosef, and he goes with the Roiv sometimes, usually. Okay, so question is what's the teretz? What's the teretz in these two different things? So first of all, I want to show you the makor for the Marabach, and then we'll understand a little better. So look at this. This is Gemara, Hoirius Daf Beis, and this is going to be the makor for what the Marabach really says. First Mishnah in Hoirius. Hoiru Bezdin Lavor Alachas Mikol Mitzvahs V'Amuras B'Torah. If the Bezdin paskined to go against the mitzvah, in other words, they made a mistake and they were matir something that's aser, like they were matir chaylev, a certain type of chaylev, and people went and they
what's hara mean?
Hoiru, they paskined
Like harayos.
Yeah. So the Bezdin paskined to go and eat chaylev, let's say. The halach hayachid v'yasa shaygig al piyam. There's a yachid, a simple yid who doesn't know any better, and he listened to the Sanhedrin and he went and ate the chaylev. Bein sha'astu v'yastu v'imahim, bein sha'astu v'yasa achrein, bein sha'astu v'yasa v'yasa pater. This yid is pater from bringing a carbon for eating chaylev, mipnei shetala bebezdin, because he depended on bezdin, because he's a simple yid, he doesn't know halacha himself, and he just listens to what they said. So therefore, they said it's mutter. He's allowed to eat it. He's not, I mean, whatever. Once he ate it, he doesn't have to bring a carbon. It's not his fault that he ate it. Okay. Next case. Hoiru bezdin v'yada echad mehen shetau. Let's say there's one of the bezdin themselves, a gadol, a chacham, a talmid chacham, who knew that the bezdin made a mistake. Or maybe he's not in bezdin, he's not in one of the Sanhedrin, but he's fit to be in the Sanhedrin. V'halach v'asta al piyan, and he went and followed them. Bein she'astu v'yasa imon, bein she'astu v'yasa achrein, bein she'lo yastu v'yasa, harei ze chayev. Then this yid is chayev. This talmid chacham is chayev for eating chaylev. Why? Mipnei shaloi tala bebezdin, because he didn't really rely on bezdin, because really he's enough of a talmid chacham to know better, right? He himself learned the sugya. He realizes that it's aser, so he is chayav for eating it because he was tala bebezdin. He himself knew it was aser, but he ate it because he thought bezdin was matir it. He had no right to do that. So turn the page. Daf base on the base. It says like this. It's about 15 lines down. Talmud Yoshev Lifneim. Starts with the word Talmud.
Oh yes.
He's sitting in front of the Sanhedrin, and he knows how to paskin. Kagoin Shimon ben Azai, a great Tana like Shimon ben Azai. Yachol Yehei Potter. You might think that he's Potter for following Bezdin. Talmud Loimer Ba'asoisa. The pasuk says Ba'asoisa. Achas Yachid Ha'oisa Al Pi Atzmoi. Oh, Ba'asoisa Achas. That's the pasuk. Ba'asoisa Achas. So Zok the Gemara. Yachid Ha'oisa Al Pi Atzmoi Chayev Be'oiras Bezdin Potter. If the Yid does the Aveira on his own, basically on his own, knowing on his own that it's Aser, he's Chayev. But if he does it based on the Bezdin, he's Potter. How could it be that he's doing the Aveira if he knows that it's Aser to do the Aveira? What's his ties? Why does he think it's allowed to do it? He's thinking that it's a mitzvah to listen to the Chacham. In other words, he thinks that the lin of Acher Rabbim Lahatois is, even if I know it's Aser, I'm still supposed to eat it because I think it's mutter. So basically, in the context of today, that would be like voting. That would be like, let's say you have a big Talmud Chacham, learn the whole Vayom Moshe, or let's say the Satmar rebbe himself, who paskin that it's also to vote, and now he's going to say, oh, but since the Bezdin of Aguda paskin that it's mutter, I'm going to go do it because I follow them. And the Gemara is saying that's wrong. You don't follow the majority if you know that they're wrong. Okay? So now let's look at this Ramban. Ramban explains that this is only when they didn't speak together. So the Ramban, Sefer HaMitzvahs, Shoresh Rishon. You know, the Rambam has the beginning of Sefer HaMitzvahs. He has Shorashim, what to count as a mitzvah, what not to count. Mm-hmm. So the first one is about counting mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. So there's a whole arichas here, Rambam and the Ramban, about mitzvahs d'Rabbanan and the pasuk of Lo Sassover. So the Ramban says here, by the part I have like pencil next to it, Yesh Bazet Tnai, that there's a din that you're supposed to listen to Bezdin. And by the way, he said before the story of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel. You know the story of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel?
With Yom Kippur?
Right. Rabbi Gamliel paskin one way about the Chodesh, and right. He forced him to come and be mevatel himself and come on Yom Kippur. Why? Because that's the din. Once Bezdin paskins, he has to follow the Bezdin even if you disagree with them. Even the Kula. Okay? So the Ramban says, V'yesh b'zeh t'nai. There's a condition for that. You'll understand this tonight if you learn the first parak of Hoyres, which we just saw. There was a Talmud Chacham who was fit to paskin, just like Sanhedrin. Bezdin Hagadol paskin that something is mutter. But he thinks that they made a mistake. He's not supposed to listen to the Bezdin. He's not allowed to do the thing that's aser. He has to keep the chumrah for himself. If he was with the Sanhedrin, he should not just go home, keep silent, and go home and eat whatever they said was mutter to eat. No. He has to come before them and tell them his arguments, and they will discuss it with him. If they all agree that he's wrong, if they shlugged up all his rise, then he should go and follow their opinion afterwards. He has to agree with V'yasu Haskama. I guess they came to an agreement about his highness. Okay? Basically, the Ramban is saying this chiluk. He's saying that if you discuss it with them and they shlug you up, then you got to follow them. So let's say the Satmar rebbe would sit down with a bunch of other gedolim and they'd all say to vote, and he'd say not to vote, and they'd all discuss with him and they'd come out, vote, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, then the Satmar rebbe would have to vote. But since he didn't sit down with them, he is...
But you also said only if there's a suffix, but if there's no suffix and it doesn't go by if there's no suffix, then like if everyone is Christian, you're not gonna say you're Christian.
Right, just because the Rav says something crazy, you're
Right,
not
doesn't
going to
say it's
follow
only.
it.
Don't you say that someone else? It's only if there's a suffix, then you go to the majority, but not if there's no suffix.
If it's a davar, a mishnah, a davar, it's like something that's mefurish in the Gemara, mefurish in the Torah, yeah, it's different. But here we're talking about something that's not mefurish in the Torah. It's a whole question. There's Sfarim written about it. So
there's no suffix, so that's why.
Well, but I'm saying about Zionism itself, there's no suffix. But here, the shiloh of voting was a big shiloh. Some poskim
But
said,
even there's no suffix.
all right. But the point is that if something's a svara, the Rebbe in Bayom Moshe is treating this like a halacha shiloh. He's saying just like the Marabach and the Mari Rav disagreed, so I disagree with the people in my door. So you're going to tell me they're the Rav? I'll tell you that I didn't sit down with them. The Rebbe is comparing this to that. But I'm just saying that you see from this Gemara and the Ramban on the Gemara that the pshat in this shtickle that he's bringing for the Marabach, the pshat is that it's true Achri Rab Nahatos, but that only applies when you're with them. But when you're not with them, it doesn't apply. So what is the pokeach ivrim saying? He's saying that you have to follow the Rav. So what's pshat in that? So what I want to say is that's pshat from the observer standpoint, from the simple yid. In other words, if you're a Talmud Chacham and you know the sugya, you follow whatever you know. Okay? That's pashut. He's not discussing that. And they don't have to give in. Even if there's a rive against them. You don't have to give in, because if you learn the sugya well and you understand it, and you're a paisik, then you follow your psak. That's not the pshat. The pshat is here. He's saying that an outside observer, let's say a pashut yid, a yid that doesn't know how to paskin, he would have to follow the rive. Okay? And he's basing himself on, he says it's called bar de beirav. Every kid in the Cheder knows this. But really, where does it come from? It comes from the Ramah, in Chosh Mishpat Chaf Hey, where he's bringing the klali apsak. The Ramah is a little sif where he brings the klali apsak. And he says like this. He says, V'im hu b'hoiras isser v'heter. V'hu davar aster deraisa. If it's something that's aster mi deraisa, yelech l'chumra. He should go l'chumra. V'i davar derabanan, if it's a derabanan, yelech achra mekel. Then you should follow the kula. V'dav k'im beis ha'chokim heim shavim. But that's only if the two rabbis who disagree are equal. If one of them is greater, b'chachma minyan. Chachma means he's greater in wisdom, and minyan means he's greater in his number of talmidim in his base medrash. So if one of them is greater, you don't go after the lesser one, even the chumrah. Okay? Sorry, you don't follow the lesser one. Unless you have a combination of shas adchak and hefsid meruba. What exactly the difference is, I don't know. But there's a difficult situation and a big loss, then you follow the lesser of the two. Here's what we want. It's a single individual poisek against the rabbim, or let's say even a minority against the majority. You always follow the rabbim. Okay, even if the rabbim of the poskim don't all agree on the reason, each posik has his own reason to be mekel or makmir, whatever it is. Since they all agree to the actual halacha, mikri rabbim v'azlim and basrayu. You go after the rabbim. Okay. So this is the klali apsak of the Ramah. It's also brought by the Shach, by the way, in Yordea, Reishman Beis. So, doesn't that seem to indicate that if you're a simple yid, like me and you, and we hear that there's a machlokes whether to vote or not, and there's a roiv saying to vote, then we should go after the roiv. Huh? So maybe we should go and start voting. So, that's the time of the pokeach ivrim. What I want to show you is that it depends. In other words, this thing about following roiv poskim, the Ramah says, is talking about, let's say a situation like today. A yid opens up the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef, he sees there's roiv rishonim saying something. Marshal in Simon in Siman Shin Ayin Hey, Shin Mem Hey, in Hilchos Erevin. The first Siman in Hilchos Erevin is about the shaila of what's a reshus rabbim. You know the whole question of what a reshus rabbim is. So some poskim hold that you have to have 600,000 people to make it a reshus rabbim, and some hold that you don't. So the Ramah paskins that you need 600,000. So therefore today's streets, even the Mechaber also paskins, today's streets are not a reshus rabbim, and we're able to make an eruv.
600,000, it doesn't matter Jews are going.
No, it doesn't matter. So according to them, you can make an eruv unless you have 600,000 people in the street, which is a shaila in Brooklyn if we have that today. But unless you have that, Moshe held that you have it even today. You have 600,000 in Brooklyn. But let's say you have a small town. Forget about Brooklyn. Let's say you have a town like Lakewood. Okay, it was a town like Lakewood or like Muncie. You don't have 600,000 people in the streets. So can you make an eruv?
So I mean, places like Bronx and Queens, it might be mutter or no?
I don't know exactly the population and how many people have to go through them, and the cars on the highways. I'm not sure. I'm not going to talk about the New York City. Let's talk about a small town.
Williamsburg I was told there's an even bigger problem than Bar Park. I was told there's some rabbis from out to the Bar Park area, but they're against it.
Could be, yeah. So in Siman Shin Mem Hey, right? So the Mechaber and the Ramah paskin that you need 600,000. So therefore, they say that you're allowed to make an eruv, right? Lashenkin the other poskim, there's a number of poskim. The Rambam, the Rashba, other poskim say that you don't need that. Any street that's 16 amas wide is automatically reshus rabbim. So the Mishnah Berurah brings it down and says that even though the Roiv is like the Mechaber and the Ramah, the Roiv says that you're taka allowed to make an eruv, but it's nachon lahachmir kedivrei hamiyut. It's nachon. It's better to be machmir, to follow the shita that you do have to be machmir and you can't make an eruv, even if there's no 600,000. So it's better, according to the Mishnah Berurah, it's better not to carry in the eruv in any of the cities in America today. All right, but what I wanted to show you from that is that's a good example of where you have Roiv Poskim saying something. So Roiv Poskim counts when we're living here in the year 2021. We don't have any shaykhs to the Rambam, Rashi, Tosfos, right? We don't belong to one posik over the other. So to us, they're all equal. So if they all say something, you could count them up and say, okay, here you have majority, here you have minority. Okay. However, take a look at this Gemara in Erevin. Gemara in Erevin speaks about a case where they followed two chumras. Rav and Shmuel had a machlokes about two different things, and they followed both chumras. They followed Rav's chumrah in one thing and Shmuel's chumrah in the other thing, in the same street. So the Gemara says, "Umi avdina," in the second wide line. So it says, "Umi avdina ketrei chumri."
I'm sorry.
The second wide line. Do we follow two chumras at the same time? The chumrah of one posik and the chumrah of the other posik. For Hatanya, lo'olam halacha kebeis Hillel. The halacha is like Beis Hillel. V'haraitza laso is kedivra Beis Shammai oiseh. Someone could follow Beis Shammai if they want, and kedivra Beis Hillel oiseh. He could follow Beis Hillel. But mikule Beis Shammai and mikule Beis Hillel, if you pick and choose, you go heter shopping. You take the kulas of Beis Shammai and the kulas of Beis Hillel, rasha. That's bad. But mechumra Beis Shammai and mechumra Beis Hillel, if you go chumra shopping, you take the chumra from each one, then all of a kasiv oimer hakasil b'chosh choylech. You're not bad, but you're a fool. You're walking in darkness. Either you follow Beis Shammai all the way, both the kula and the chumrah, or you follow Beis Hillel all the way. The Gemara goes on to say that when it says Lo'olam halacha Beis Hillel, that's talking after the Baskol. But before the Baskol, we didn't have a psak halacha Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, so you could follow whichever one you want, as long as you're consistent. You have to follow the same posik all the time. And there's a whole long story here about that. So here's the thing: this Ramah that we saw in Chosh Mishpat, that comes from an Avodah Zarah, a Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Zayin. Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Zayin says all the klalim of how to paskin. You go the chumrah by deraisa, the kula, depends if the posik is greater, posik is less great. Roiv yachid v'rabim, halach karabim. All those klali apsak are in the Avodah Zarah maybe not Yachid V'Rabban, but the other ones are all in the Avodah Zarah Dav Zayin. Here in Eruvin, you have a new Metzias. It looks like you follow one pokeach, you stick to him all the time, you follow whatever he says. So how's that shtim? So the answer is, Rishonim say, the Ran says, here we're talking about when the halacha was gepaskut already. Let's say you know what the halacha is. Meaning, you're from Beis Hill, let's say. You know the halacha like Beis Hill, or before the Baskul, you were like Beis Shammai. But the point is, you were like one pokeach. Or later on, the Gemara is going to bring other people in, Rav and Shmuel, let's say, Reb Meir and the Rabbanan. There are other Tanaim that argued about things. If you're going to go with one pokeach all the way, it's because the halacha is like that pokeach. Or, Huadin, if you're from his city, if you're from the city of a pokeach, like you're from Nardah, they followed Shmuel. You're from Surah, they followed Rav. Wherever you are, you follow the pokeach of your place, or your rebbe. If you follow your rebbe, then you're good. You can follow him l'kula and l'chumra. All the klali hapsak are said when you don't have a rebbe. Like I gave you an example before. If you have like the Rishonim disagree about Rishis Rabbim, so then it's like a long time ago, right? We're not from the city of the Rambam. We're not from the city of Rashi. We don't have any preference for one over the other. So then you go and you count them up. Shenkin over here, if you're from that group, you follow your rebbe. So kumtois, going back to the words of the pokeach ivrim, his argument is what? His argument is, you got to follow the roiv of the poskim. So Aguda said to vote, you got to follow Aguda. So the answer is not so. If you're an Agudist, you're a hardcore follower of Aguda, or from one of the Rabbanim who said to vote, okay, maybe he has a point. But if you're not from that, who said that that's your rebbe, that you could follow him? Right? Maybe you're from the Chassidish, you're from someone who follows the Satmar Rebbe. Or maybe you're a brisker, you should follow the brisker Rav, who also didn't say to vote. Or maybe you're a Chazanish person, you follow the Chazanish.
Well, what about an older Agudas?
What?
Well, what about the older Agudas?
The Aguda from before the war, you mean? Yes. Before you said to vote. In the Chanami. So if you're, I'm going to get to that soon. If you're a chassid of the Aguda from then, that doesn't make you automatically a chassid of the Aguda now, because the Aguda completely changed.
He was an older time Aguda. Like
right.
Showed you that it has.
Yeah, right. So that's the point. So basically, does the pokeach even have a point? He does. He has a point. It is true that you should follow the roiv. That's only if you're totally unaffiliated. You're just some person on the street, a yid who comes from nowhere, and you have no rebbe. But if you have a rebbe, you should follow your rebbe, and you should follow him all the way. Okay, that's one point I wanted to make. Now let's go on with what he says. So the next paragraph, look back in Vayom Moshe over here. Next paragraph of Kufay and Gimel. He says like this. He says an additional svar, which the pokeach doesn't quote. If all the frum Jews in the world would get together and everyone could say their opinion, without any fear, without any bias, then most of the world would agree to what I'm saying. You can't do this now. Many Rabbanim don't even want to come into this subject. They don't want to discuss it in their shul or their beis medrash. That they're not in agreement with the masses on this. So they're not going to say anything to make everybody angry, so therefore they just stay away from the subject. To say the truth in his heart, he has the fear of the people upon him, and he can't say it. Okay.
Cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. When they make an asifa in the world, like maybe in a Aguda convention, there's a lot of a mixture of different opinions there. There are many people among them who have completely wrong, messed up views of the Medina, and they're very nogeh b'davar. So therefore, you can't expect them to come out and say the truth clearly. Bottom line, you see, what he's saying here is
truth hurts.
Yeah. So he's saying an additional argument. Before he said that when you have a yachid v'rabbim and the yachid didn't meet with the rabbim, you don't paskin like the rabbim. But now what he's saying is that today, that the Rebbe has all his arguments lined up here in Vayol Moshe, and if he would say them to the world and say them to the Rabbanim, most of them would agree with him. So it's sort of like the klal that halacha kebas roi. There's a rule that when, let's say, a later chacham disagrees with an earlier chacham, you go after the later one, because the pshat is the later one heard the arguments of the earlier one and he disagrees. Mashenkin, the earlier one didn't hear the arguments of the later one. So the same thing here. He's saying like this: I'm standing here in 1959, I'm writing my sefer. They already paskin 10 years ago to go to the Knesset elections. And if they would have heard by Yom Moshe, or if they would have met together with the Rebbe, and by the way, the Rebbe did try to meet with a lot of people and to convince them afterwards on his trips to Eretz Yisrael. He tried very hard to meet with them, the Belzer Rebbe included.
Today's or the...
No, I'm talking about the Satmar Rebbe back then, the 50s. He tried very hard to convince them, but the point is that...
when you say Belzer Rebbe, you mean Araldar Belzer?
Rabbaran. So the point is that if he would have had a chance to meet with them, then he could have changed their minds, and they didn't see what he wrote when they paskined. So therefore, it's like halacha kebas roi, that you would paskin like what the Rebbe says because he's coming later. Okay. Okay, one more paragraph from pokeach ivrim. I'm just skipping because we kind of summarized what we said already anyway. Okay, last paragraph. Or let's go in order, just in case someone has a time. Let's read the whole thing. We're in the paragraph that we started with. V'gam kol bar bei rav dechad yoyma yodeh she'sanhedrin ketana shel chaf gimel shebechol year v'year danim dinei nefashos al pi haroiv shebohem. That the Sanhedrin could paskin based on the roiv of the 23. Hainu yud beis mitoy chaf gimel av shehem miut chachmei Eretz Yisrael. Even though, let's say, there's a Sanhedrin in every city, and there's a Sanhedrin shel shivim v'echad, but they're the minority, and they could still paskin. Upashat l'kol shelo yitzarich l'kapetz b'shvil kol din v'din as kol l'kapetz b'shvil kol din v'din as kol chacham sheberetz Yisrael. You don't have to gather everyone together. V'chachmei Yisrael shebechol olam kulei b'vadei shelo yitzarich. You don't have to gather everyone in the whole world. Obviously, the answer to what he's saying is, yeah, but in this case, the chachamim in the whole world did express their opinion about the subject. So you can't say that you should just blindly listen to the chachamim in one place when the chachamim in another place disagreed. The Sanhedrin of Chaf Gimel, they were assigned the case. They have to paskin on this murder or whatever it is. So they can paskin, yeah, and no one else has to paskin. But Shenkin over here, the voting issue, the Knesset issue, a lot of people around the world express their opinions, so you have to reckon sich with all the opinions. Okay, weiter. Ve'oid, techol mi shekvar roa b'shalas tshuvas harabach, im kein b'vadei roa gam es chedushay agadol shel Rambam. But someone who learns the sugi of smicha will know what the Rambam says, shegam izman zev shel chadash smicha, that we could go back and reinstitute smicha, al yidei she'izkabtzu kol chachmei Eretz Yisrael, that you could gather all together all the sages of Eretz Yisrael. Ki harei al zeh soivim kol divrei Rabach. The Rabach is going on this subject. So the concept that you need all the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael is only Lagabe Smicha. How could he bring proof from this to the other things? How could he jump from that to the sages all around the world? Now obviously this is off the mark because we just showed that the Rebbe is coming very strongly. He's coming from the not just the Marabach, he's coming from the Gemara and Hoirius and the Ramban that we showed. Yeah, the Yachid doesn't have to cave into the Rabbim just because he's a Yachid if the Rabbim didn't hear his arguments. Okay. Last paragraph here in the pokeach. Last paragraph. There you go. He says another argument, which we'll see what to say about this in a minute. He says the Moetzes Gedolei Torah, if they all voted to go to the elections, then yeah, they would be the kulai. They wouldn't be rubai, they would be kulai. He's saying what the Satmar Rebbe says that they're rubai is wrong. They're not rubai, they're kulai. K'moy b'shar bezdin, v'hu bezdin la'anhagas haklal. Because the bezdin of the aguda is the bezdin of Klal Yisrael that runs the whole Klal Yisrael for the inyani haklal, not for like simple cases like stealing and whatever and killing, simple one-person cases. But here we're talking about a klal bezdin, a bezdin that paskins big shilas there in the gate to Klal Yisrael. Hamuska malchuge hayadus hacharedis, and it's agreed upon by all the groups. Makes a very broad statement here, right? All the groups from Jewry in the whole world agreed on the Moetzes Gedolei Torah, Mishum Shehem Rabbi Seim Shel Revavos Hacharedim Ba'arteinu Akdosha. That they are the rebbes of all the multitudes in Eretz Yisrael. V'gam Gedolei Chutz La'aretz Maskimi Mimoim Ekroinis. And even the Gedolim of Chutz La'aretz agree with the Moetzes in Eretz Yisrael in principle. Milvad Eizer Rabbanim Hanasunim Be'emas Terror Ubizyonis Mechasidei Satmar. He says Samach Mem, but I think he means Satmar. Basically, he says that some Rabbanim who are under pressure from Satmar, they won't agree with the Aguda. Who's
that? Who's under pressure?
I don't know. I guess other rebbes.
Really cool.
I don't know. Mefachtim shelo yasu boy k'moy shastu l'kvod kedushas ha'admor mikloisenberg shlita u'lo yadmorim rabbanim. Yeah, I don't know what he means by this. Shazeh poisel adayanim.
He was a bad guy.
Yeah, I don't know all the lashon hara about the stories that happened, but the point is,
it is fact he took off his.
So just to respond to this whole taina that he's saying that the Moetzes is accepted by Roy of Klal Yisrael. So this is really, really wrong. So first of all, you have to realize that before the war, whoever was subscribed to Aguda before the war has nothing to do with the Aguda of now. You know, the Rebbe has a whole simon on this. Kuf Mem Gimel. You look in Kuf Mem Gimel, and Kuf Mem Beis actually. Start from Kuf Mem Beis. Turn back. He says, V'yesh shaholchim b'sami yiseinayim. There's some people who blindly follow the Aguda. Yan shezeh ma'aseh ha'aguda shahaya bis yastusa gam gedolim v'tzadikim midor shel fanenu. That the Aguda was founded by gedolim and tzadikim in the previous generation. L'chein ein lahar achreim. You can't doubt whatever they do. V'das l'novoi nakal asher hevel yiftzapiem. However, if you understand things, you'll understand that that's not right. That's the empty words. He says, I remember the whole story of how the Aguda started. From the first Asifa, Bad Hamburg, Kadovitz, all these things. I spoke to many of the Gedolei Yisrael, Hoela, B'dvar Aguda. I spoke on the matter of the Aguda. V'yasaper b'kitzer. He says, Hinei, Roiv Gedolei Yisrael hayu misnagdim la'aguda mitchila v'yad soif. Most of the Gedolim were against the Aguda. So it's not true to say that Roiv were in favor. Not even then. Even before the war, the Mitzchas Lazar and a lot of people who helped him and signed with him, all the Hungarian Rabbanim, for example, were all against the Aguda. El shahar beGedolim savchu aleim b'koyle koilis. There were some people that were stark against him. He spoke out. There were others who didn't speak out so much. They just kept quiet. It wasn't their way to speak out. Quietly, they did tell their followers not to join the Aguda. There were indeed people who had their kavanah was for l'shem shemaim l'shehachziku es aguda. They did support it. They held the Aguda was the ones who fought the Zionism and the Mizrachi. They were very bitter about what the Tzionim did. And they were very afraid of all the danger that could be caused by them. As kol mi that they wanted to join anybody who fought the Tzionim and the Mizrachim. That's what motivated them to join the Aguda. That they used to fight them. Yeah. Then he goes on, he says, basically, that eventually the Tzionim, the Aguda did join up with the Zionists and the Mizrachim. And then he says later on, the second column, like 10 lines down, he says, V'chol ha'gedolim shebedor shelefonenu, shahoyse kavanasam l'shamayim, l'hachizik esu Aguda, that they wanted for good reasons to support the Aguda, loy ola al daitam oz maisa tatuim ko'ela. They never dreamed that the Aguda would do such a thing. V'ho'eda neman al zeh hu arav agoyin atzadik ha'mefursim hu admur migur Zichron livracha shahaya roish machazkim esu Aguda. The Ger Rebbe himself, who was the leader of Aguda, the Imramis, yeah. B'yamav v'nidfas mimenu michtav gali b'oisef michtavim. There's a letter that's written on by him, michtav lamed, shehisraim me'oid al misha mischaber l'miflaga sheyesh ba chafshim oy mekabel matana mehem shezeh mazik. He said, anybody who joins a party of non-religious Jews or people who receive gifts from them it's very dangerous to do that. So he's here al-kacha, he warned them not to do it. He didn't agree, he didn't dream that the Aguda would ever do that themselves. The Aguda did join the Zionist Knesset. They joined the Mizrachi. V'nasu kesher echad. It became like the united religious front together with the Mizrachi in the first election. Liyos chazis dasis. V'kulam mekablim loy rak eizem atana bilvad. They're not just getting a little gift. El kol ikar kiyumam v'chiyusam shel Aguda pulosel. All the money for the Aguda, v'achinach shelahem, all their schools. Whom mikayach matnas yadam shel eila haboyim lakar kol toyer kula chas v'shalom. They're getting money from the Zionists whose purpose is to destroy the Torah. Obviously, they're going to be sold over because they're getting all their sustenance from them. So they're going to be like blinded by the bribe. And the Hemshech, just to turn the page here, he says, Al kolpanim zev vadesh nishtanu in yanu Aguda l'griyusa harbe meish nischaber l'mlucha atbeya. The Aguda completely changed when they joined up with the government, the Zionist government. Like I think the Satmar rebbe said this, the marshal about the train. I don't know if you heard this. The marshal of the train. You take a train, and you take the car. A train can go either way. You take the engine, you move it to the other end of the train, and you drive it the other way. Right. Mm-hmm. Same thing today. The Metro North trains, maybe the subway trains also. They go to the end of the line. They just go backwards the other way. Right. Mm-hmm. So. That's what the Aguda is like. He said the Aguda until one point they were fighting the Zionists. They were going this way. All of a sudden, turned around, went the opposite way. So
they're worse than the Tzionim because they make believe.
Right, they make people believe that that's good. So bottom line is basically the people before the war, people who were all on the side of the Aguda, they don't count for this purpose because it's not the same Aguda. All right, that's one point. And secondly. Afterwards, it's not so posh that there's a roiv either. It's a new shaila. Basically, the voting shaila is a new shaila. It's not totally in the previous aguda. You can't be mitzaref that to the shaila. And secondly, today it's not roiv because you have great people like they have the Brisker Rav and the Chazon Ish who didn't sign under the voting, right? And you have the Gedolim in America who didn't sign, right? So, like
were they actually asked to?
I'm not sure if they were even asked. No, I don't know. When they sent around the letter to the hundreds of people and tried to get them to sign to vote, I'm not sure if
was
they were
sent to America.
I don't think so. Otherwise, we would have people on the list who were in America. I don't think so. But what the point I'm trying to make is that in the Ramah, I lost it. But the Ramah, when he says the Klali Apsak, he mentions that. If someone's greater, here it is. If someone's greater, he says, that if you have one against one's greater than the other, you're not soymach on the cotton against the gadol. And huadin, if you have a roiv, and you look at the people in the roiv, and you add them up, you have to look. It's not just pashut, you just count people. You have to know who's greater and who's less great. So if you have great people like the Chazon Ish and the Brisker Rav who didn't join the psak of voting, that puts a big weight against them. Especially with all the poskim who were around at that time in America, and they didn't say anything either. So it's not true what he says that it's the roiv, and it's not true that it was accepted on all of Klal Yisrael.